Lee's face was in the Golden Gate Bridge. Oh yeah, so we have like a variety of content that we're playing around with. Some of it might be hanging out, doing live coding. Some of it might be music or just being silly and sharing stuff. So if you have any requests, definitely put them in the chat, and we will see what we can fit in. How you doing, Lee?
It's good. I've been toying around with Zoom this morning.
Yes, yes.
Hence the virtual background.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because Lee's on Linux, and we weren't sure if the virtual backgrounds were working yet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's cool to see you guys also on YouTube Live. And I see that people watching there as well. So this will be, a lot of this will be fairly new for us, monitoring 2 chat rooms.
Yeah.
So where are people dialing in from? If you want to put it in the chat, we'd love to hear what time zones, what regions people are dialing in from, because we're just also going to be playing around with different start times, trying to see maybe what works for some people and for others. Maybe your schedules are a little different right now because of shelter in place, or some people maybe even in quarantine. So maybe you have some availability to join online now that you don't at other times. I'll put in chat. I'm dialing in from Oakland, California.
I'm out here in Denver.
Lee's in Denver.
Yeah.
Stacey's also in Oakland, and Daniel is out in Berlin.
Berlin, yes.
Yes, in Berlin, yes. Yeah, I'm kind of looking at the names here. Just curious where people. Okay, we have Paris, France. That's cool. Where else are people dialing in from? Oh, we have someone from London on the YouTube, and from Brazil. How cool. I have to look at both screens. Okay, so time zone wise, that's pretty good so far. Hopefully we're not too late in some people's evenings. Anybody else? Anybody from different continents, parts of Asia? That's always a tricky one for us when we're trying to balance Europe and Asia. Well, Europe and Asia can work together, but then Asia and California, the West Coast, can sometimes be a challenge.
Yeah, you get the early birds and the insomniacs.
Yes. So yeah, if you've just joined in, these are sort of practice sessions that we've invited the community to join. We're trying out different platforms. So if anybody has platform preferences or tips and tricks, let us know. Also, if you, obviously you're here for the concept of GitOps Days, if in any way, any of the content that we provide over the coming weeks and at the official GitOps Days event that we'll announce for May, there's specific questions you want answered, there's specific things you want to know about GitOps, we can definitely create content for that. So please, oh, you've been in Auckland. Yes, that's a great place. I thought you were dialing in from Auckland. So yeah, maybe now, like I said, this is a sound check period and we're chatting. We have like about 20 minutes left before Lee will give his first talk. So if you have any particular things, let us know what drew you to GitOps, or what drew you to the idea of GitOps, or are any of you already active practitioners of GitOps? Maybe some of you might be the people saying, oh, I've been doing this, but I didn't know there was a word for it before.
Yeah, it's funny. Back when I think GitOps, like as an idea and as a practice, is a lot older, than just the past few years. But we've really kind of started to document and more widely adopt the principles, now that we have things like Kubernetes. But I think if you're doing, very strict and maybe even like very advanced workflows on top of something like Puppet, they've been, basically telling people to do GitOps, since 2006.
Yeah. And we'll talk also about some questions we get are, can I do GitOps without Kubernetes? Is it a Kubernetes dependent thing, right? So we'll cover that. I don't know if we'll cover this, but I know sometimes we've had questions. Oh, I like this concept of GitOps. Do I need Git? That's not on our docket for today, but it's definitely a question we've gotten.
Yeah, I'm not knowledgeable on many systems outside of Git that could do version control, except for like Google Docs.
That's true, Google Docs.
GDocs Ops.
Maybe that'll be a whole show. I have to say,
Kubernetes managed by Google Sheets.
Exactly.
Oh, wow, that sounds terrible and like kind of cool. Maybe that'd be a good idea for a demo sometime. I could do that.
Yes. So, yeah, maybe I'll ask. So, Daniel in Brazil. Well, first, how did you find out about this, and what are you looking to learn? We'd definitely put some content on the docket. Or Philip in London. GitOps works great with Ansible. Yes. So you're definitely a GitOps practitioner today. That's good to hear. And yeah, I don't know. Have we had specific talks about talking at GitOps with Ansible?
So with regard to Ansible and GitOps, I think this is interesting. Ansible's like mostly a push workflow, but there's no reason you can't change it around. And you see people do this in the same way with things like Puppet, agentless Puppet, where they flip Puppet from being a pull-based workflow to a push-based one. I think what's really cool about Ansible is that especially even early on, they were already building modules to provision VMs in EC2 and do this kind of infrastructure as code portion, not just the configuration management part. And I think a lot of people, when they talk about GitOps outside of Kubernetes, they're talking about things like Terraform. And so for Ansible to be able to do some of the similar things, like spin up a Kubernetes cluster with the infrastructure in the cloud, makes it pretty cool. And the configuration files for Ansible are pretty declarative as well. We don't have any particular talks about this, but I don't see why you couldn't, have something that's constantly applying your Ansible script, either from a central like bastion host style location, or just having it be run on each host themselves by pulling the Ansible configuration relevant to that host. Pretty interesting to think about.
Yeah.
You could split up the stack, right, to have like the provisioning side and then the config management and application config side. And you could have the provisioning side be push-based until everything is bootstrapped. And then have that run on a loop. And then the application part could then fetch from the Git repository and do a local apply. Does anybody manage their laptop with Ansible by chance in the chat? No? I always thought it might be a good way to do things.
I'm looking at both chats to see. Maybe Philip does? I don't know.
Yeah.
Put a little note here. Oh, one of our person from Paris says, I know a friend who does so with Salt.
Oh, he manages his laptop with Salt, or they do. Yeah. That's cool. And yeah, I just have like a shell script that unpacks my dot files. I've really been wanting to upgrade to something a little nicer.
Yeah. And Philip says he's currently using Flux with Kubernetes, but also using Terraform and Ansible for cloud infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. So if you're using Flux with Kubernetes, you're already pretty far along on the GitOps train. And then, and then if you're not, just using G-Cloud or the AWS CLI to create resources or even the console, then that's a huge plus because all of your infrastructure is already at least versioned from an infrastructure and just code standpoint in a repository. One really cool way to do GitOps with Terraform is with a bot. It's open source infrastructure you can run called Run Atlantis. You should check it out, runatlantis.io. We use it actually at Weaveworks to do our Terraform for our GitHub repos and all of that.
Who built that?
I don't know who builds Atlantis, but it's a great project. Seems pretty open to me.
A statement in and of itself. I don't know who built Atlantis.
Yeah.
So Philip also says, yes, we have an Ansible script to onboard new engineers, install Atom, Git, and so on.
Mm. GitOps for people's laptops.
Yeah, in so many different ways. And yeah, if you say you're pretty advanced with GitOps using Flux, we're awaiting ourselves, our CTO. We have a new CTO at Weaveworks, and Cornelia Davis, who came from Pivotal. She's been here now, maybe not quite 6 months, but she has really ramped up really quickly. And part of what we're excited about for the GitOps Days is she has this whole vision of what the next evolution of GitOps will be. Like she's like, even some of us, because we kind of identified the concept from our own creation of Flux and our own use of Flux, but also of seeing what we saw was happening in the environments and the ecosystem. But some of that knowledge meant that maybe we were kind of thinking about our own definitions of GitOps in a very Flux specific way. And so she's really been studying up for months now and is very excited about how there's so much more that GitOps can be. So I'm very excited to hear when that keynote finally happens. So at this point, it's about 4 weeks away. So it'll be pretty cool.
Cornelia is really cool. She comes from a very tenured background of managing platforms and understanding what people need. Also super educated in the DevOps space. You should go check out her previous talks.
Yes, she's got a book. A different Philip says, the Atlantis team have joined HashiCorp and work on Terraform Cloud now. There was an announcement about this from HashiCorp a while back. Cool, thanks for sharing
that. Thanks, yeah.
And Daniel's saying, currently using Terraform to provision infrastructure and Jenkins as a CI/CD for Kubernetes. Using Terraform to deploy using Helm release also, but looking for new ways to improve it using GitLab CI or Flux.
Yeah, I have been in this environment before, and I think that using Helm with CI can be very effective. It can be the thing that improves your release process to the point where you're now releasing so much, that you're breaking things. And that's a good place to be because now you've gone past the technical barrier and you're into the social portion of this, right? Which is how do we solve the social problems about releasing? How can we track what we're doing? Do we know what we're doing? And one thing, some things that I would caution against just gotchas that we ran into. I'm actually wearing my Beatport hoodie, proud Beatport alumni. And we were using Google Container Builder with Helm release and Helm 2 at that time. And it can get a little bit flaky when you're talking to the API server over the internet, the Kubernetes API server. I do think that a pull-based workflow, if you're looking for reliability in your release process, and if you're looking for resilience, the thing about CI ops, right, or using an event-based workflow in order to change the cluster is that you're relying on the event, right, to get things right. And maybe that does meet your requirements. But when the Git repo isn't changing, right? So say now that you're done working on that product, nothing is continuously converging the cluster state to the state of the repository. And so you can have some push-based stuff in there, but I think that it's also good to have that continuous pull-based workflow and to have it be scoped from inside of the cluster using the cluster's credentials and only pulling the state about the cluster. So instead of, like if you're in a multi-cluster world, you don't have to have the whole entire world, right? So things to look at maybe. Flux and Helm Operator are a great way to upgrade that workflow.
Very cool. Yes, and we've noticed these Phillips have taken over. One with two, well, actually one with three P's at the end. So thanks for that. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a Phillip that ends with two P's. Not in my experience. It's really cool.
I should add some silent P's to the end of my name to increase the ridiculousness.
Would it be Leigph?
That would be good, yeah. And, it's pronounced leaf, yeah.
Leaf. Well, that's not silent. Yes, Daniel has sunglasses. He's like the silent. Cool. Well, if any of you just showed up, I know there's some new people. We're doing a GitOps Days event in May. We'll be announcing it. I figured, well, why don't we try out one kind of event like this, a community special once a week. And, we can hear people's requests. We can test out some platforms. We can get your feedback. Actually, I should post that I created this email address called gitops@weave.works. So if it's like your first time here and you just want to shoot a quick note saying, hey, like I would love to hear about X, Y, and Z, or hey, you can do this better on YouTube Live, or if we test out Twitch, you can do this better on Twitch, or what have you. Yeah, just let us know. Yeah, and Stacey shared it here on our Zoom. So we're doing both Zoom and, I guess the brand is there. Zoom is on the YouTube Live. So yeah, we'll be mixing it up. We're talking about maybe some live coding at future events. Some of you know Stefan Prodon. So when he comes on, he likes to just talk for a really long time. So if you like just sitting in here and Stefan's usually like an hour is just not enough. So we'll be having some sessions where he'll just be going deep into Flux and Flagger and things to know. So if that's your thing, then you can tune in for those days. We'll have it all on our meetup pages. If you want to hang out with Lee's more comfortable. He's going to do some live coding, maybe play around with some stuff. People want to follow along. So in fact, in 8 minutes, he'll start his talk on sort of why Kubernetes and GitOps, some concepts to think about. We'll have a musical break with Daniel. We might even do a musical break right now to give Lee a little bit of breathing room. And then the second half, we'll do what we have is called the GitOps hands-on that Stefan created, and Lee will walk people through. If you haven't seen it before, then it's definitely something that you might want to check out. It'd be a good way to get you started. Philip here says it's, or this was probably part of the previous thread. It's Terraform and customized based, focus on the infrastructure and cluster services side, not the application workloads. So I might have lost my thread there, but maybe it's based on what you were talking about, Lee, or what he was sharing earlier about what they do. Yes, maybe about Atlantis. Cool.
Customize. I like that. Yeah.
Right,
Looking forward to Daniel's DJ set right here.
Yes. So if Daniel's ready,
Yes, 1 second.
you can enjoy some of his music. And actually, earlier he was sharing his setup. So he's got the dual cam going. And one webcam is propped up on a frame up there.
Yes.
Picture frame.
This was improvised. Yes.
Yes, that's awesome. and even got a disco ball out. So we're waiting for things to get a little bit darker
Yes.
in Berlin.
I've actually got some party lights in my shower. Yeah, so
Oh,
Not
turn those
bad.
on. Yeah.
which webcast is that?
I haven't considered webcasting it yet,
I,
but I do like to listen to techno. So yeah.
yeah, we don't have a lot of space where we live, so I was fantasizing if I needed to build out a guest shower, a small one, could it also be a broadcasting booth? Because I don't have a lot of space here, and with shelter in place, so like my partner and I were actually, some of you might know, we're on a lot of these calls. We're on work calls, and it's hard to do it at the same time. So we had to so I was just like, well, if I have a guest over, I don't have a guest shower, so that's a challenge. And now we also need a phone booth. So can a shower be both a phone booth? Maybe I'll be the first to invent it. Yes, haha. Oh yeah, and Omar here is curious about your room, about the broadcast. I don't know if you're talking about my room or about Daniel's room, because Daniel's setup's pretty nice. I've always enjoyed seeing the plants and such, and now we get to see
Yes.
the music corner.
Yes. And if it was a bit later, you would be seeing this as well. But
Yes, soon.
yes.
Well, we can see it sparkling on your head.
At least something.
Yes. Cool. Yeah. So when you're ready, then we'll get to that. And I will be back in 3 minutes. So enjoy Daniel's music. If there are any thoughts, please put them in the chats. We'd love to hear from you.
I like it a lot, Daniel.
All of a sudden it's another world and another time and another state of mind. All of a sudden it's another self in another vibration and another state of seeing. All of a sudden it's another world and another time and another state of mind. All of a sudden it's another self in another vibration and another state of seeing. We may have been here before, we may have taken this path one time, long time ago. All of a sudden it's another smile, it's another heartbeat, it's another style of thinking. Who can recall the flowers smell differently? Who can remember the embraces were this warm before? Another world and another time and another state of mind. All of a sudden it's another self in another vibration and another state of seeing.
It's really hard to break into this. Well, now I'm really excited for our intermission. Thank you, Daniel.
That was sweet.
That is like pretty amazing for our first pre-practice run.
Hello there.
I think we know
I'm
what our
really
future show is going to be.
Impressed.
Yes.
I never heard you DJ before. You should do that for us on some call on our happy hour call. How about?
Oh yeah, that's true. We're doing happy hours. Well, thank you,
Yeah.
Daniel. That
What's
was
your
awesome.
DJ name?
Oh yeah, what's your DJ name?
I never really wanted a DJ name. Back in the day, I was playing like drum and bass here in Berlin.
Yeah.
And at some stage, the party team, they decided to just give me a name. So they just put up posters somewhere. I said, like, put like my real name, that's fine. And which is Daniel Holbach. And they went with Holy Holbach. I really hated them for it, but yes, the name stuck for at least the next 3 or 4 parties.
So you're officially Holy Hallbuck.
No, I'm not.
Oh, yeah.
3 parties.
I don't know. We've said it now on YouTube.
10
Three.
years ago.
Yeah,
10
it's
years ago.
official. Ladies and gentlemen, the official.
All right. Well, maybe we'll have to curate a new one just for this.
Yes, it needs GitOps in the title. Otherwise, it's
Yes.
not going to work. Yes.
GitOps.
Think about it.
Yes. We'll think about
Declarative
it.
beads, something.
People can post the Daniel's GitOps DJ name. And we'll, as a community, we will come to something good. I know we will. Cool. Well, thank you, Daniel. And I guess now we'll hand it over to Lee.
All right, 1 second. Just had something come up. All right. And we will share my screen. There we go. Hey everyone. If I haven't chatted with you before, my name's Lee, and Weave is dope. Maybe you might have heard already. But we have a great logo, which is a good foundation for a strong brand. And I think what's even cooler is we have an even stronger open source community. So I personally contribute to Kubernetes, as well as some of my peers, and we help make things great. So just gonna put this up on the screen. And today, I know we were chatting and some of you are doing some pretty advanced things with Kubernetes and your infrastructure. Maybe some of you aren't using Kubernetes yet, or you're trying to decide, whether or not you don't want to use Kubernetes. And I think that a lot of the times folks have some misconceptions. I hear a lot of, bad reasons why people want to adopt these technologies. So I wanted to talk about why you actually should consider these things. And in order to really get to that reason, we should just consider first, where we've kind of come from. This is a very popular kind of web service topology, is that we run a bunch of VMs somewhere, probably in, VMware on premise or in the cloud, or maybe you're on Metal and it's not so different. You're running your own servers, and the provisioning time for those servers, is substantial. You have to manage the operating system. Each one is different. You have to patch them and that kind of thing. And containers don't get rid of all of those problems, right? But when you're in the VM world, the application pretty much takes up the machine, at least in a production context. And for each one of those machines, you got to do configuration, right? You got to do secrets, and you even have to do things like configure the daemon to run the application. So you usually have a bunch of smart DevOps or sysadmin type people who are really good at all of these different kinds of things. Or maybe they're not really good, they're just generally good. I knew that I was not amazing in every one of these functions, but when I was doing a lot of DevOps style work, I was just good enough, to read some of the docs to understand how to probably not do things so wrong. And then we would glue everything together and we would deploy our distributed application. And then, as you're changing the machines, you might also have to configure a load balancer, that kind of thing, if you're not using an autoscale group or if you're in a different environment that doesn't support that kind of dynamic service discovery, right? And so there's nothing particularly wrong about this, right? In fact, like if you were to look at the original design of something like Spinnaker, it's intended to run applications in this style of workload, and it does it really well. And a lot of the abstractions that we learned from a system like Spinnaker have graduated into these more mature declarative projects, right? So then you meet your friend Paul at a meetup, right? And he's like, oh yeah, I work at Coolco. It's this hot new startup. And we're using Kubernetes. It's this open source thing that Google made. And Kubernetes is an open source project. It's got an incredible community with many contributors now. It is a container scheduler, right? So if you haven't gotten the intro to Kubernetes before, I think that this picture basically sums up the value add, which is that Kubernetes helps you run software on a lot of systems, right? Not just computers. It helps you run software on many, many computers. But more than that, when I say system, I also mean things like your network. It helps you run software on your network. It helps you run software in your cloud. It helps you run software with your secrets management system, right? And it's got this API now. So you don't have to do config for every single machine anymore. You can declare, hey, about all of these systems, I would like it to work in this way. And that can encompass things like your configuration, your secrets, the way that traffic gets to your application and how it's deployed, so that you don't have, some average DevOps person implementing really strange blue-green algorithms that take your app down sometimes. And then you start trying to sell this to leadership, right? So you're saying, hey, leadership, I went to this talk and this person had this slide about how you could run lots of containers. And one thing I noticed was that if you were looking at the VMs, I mean, there's just like one app on every machine. But I mean, hey, look at this. Like we have multiple apps. We have system stuff. We have platform stuff. It's like all running on the same machine. So we should do the cool thing that I want to do, because Kubernetes will help me densify workflows. That will save a lot of money, right? Like, hey, if we can reduce cloud spend because CPU utilization is down 13%, like we could, move everything to Kubernetes. And I don't think that this is a bad reason to do things. And in fact, if you're working at hyperscale or like really large web scale kind of deployments, then cloud spend is a very motivating thing. I mean, if you can save a few $1 million a year because you moved to a container scheduler, that's awesome. But I do not think that bin packing, right, running many workloads in containers on a machine is the main reason to use Kubernetes. The thing is that managing many systems is pretty hard. And I think that this is probably the biggest problem statement that is solved by a system like Kubernetes, which creates an API that gives you a language. Right? Kubernetes makes managing many systems much easier, right? Because we can run software on these many systems in a global system kind of way. Right? So the thing to understand, if you haven't worked with Kubernetes before, it's got a declarative API. You might have heard this kind of statement from systems like Terraform, Puppet, Chef, and that kind of thing. And so these ideas are not new, but there are some ways that we use this declarative API in a system like Kubernetes that are newer and novel. Kubernetes API is documented very well. It's got people who are posting all over Stack Overflow. The API docs are actually a great reference. Right in the command line tool, there's a kubectl explain command, which will tell you all about how to use these things. It's well versioned, which means that things are not going to change on you. And then probably the biggest one is that it's extensible. So with things like custom resource definitions, aggregated APIs, and component config, which is actually what I work on, the Kubernetes style of API is becoming a lingua franca of systems, right? So it's becoming a common language. It's a way for things to talk to, describe intent, and integrate with each other. And this is a big deal, especially when I was mentioning with the way we are using these APIs. So the first thing, it's just a basic prerequisite, very important attribute of Kubernetes as a system is that the storage behind Kubernetes is strongly consistent using something called etcd and the Raft protocol. So this gets into some really cool distributed computing algorithm stuff, but basically you're not going to have the problem with eventual consistency where when you tell the API to do something, you don't know if the other nodes know or not. When the API gets back to you, what's written to it is consistent. Everybody's going to have the same view of the world, regardless of where you are within the many systems that Kubernetes can operate. And then you're using this declarative and descriptive API. It creates a programming model when combined with this idea called controllers. So controllers are programs that we write. They're reconciliation loops, right? So you say, hey, while true, sync on this API. Give me all of the objects. Get me all of the descriptions. And every time I'm in a loop on the descriptions, I want to make sure that all of those descriptions are satisfied. So this is different from something like Terraform apply from your laptop, right? But what it would be closer to is like we talked about the Atlantis project earlier. You have something that's constantly running, that's checking out your Terraform code and then planning against it to see if there are any changes, and then potentially even doing an apply for you, right? And so in Kubernetes, when you say, hey, please deploy my application, I want 3 of them, then there's a reconciliation loop. It's called the deployment controller. It's always running, make sure that that is true. And that doesn't happen every 5 minutes, right? It doesn't happen, only when you check it into Git. It happens whenever that API changes, and then consistently over time, regardless of what happens, right? So it's going to do the best it can to make sure that everything is reconciled to the state that you have declared. And it's going to do it quickly and reactively, and then ensure that that state is preserved. And that is a fundamental difference from the systems that we've built before, which have really struggled to achieve that kind of reactivity while still ensuring your state is applied. And I'll note that this is what's called a level triggered pull-based workflow. We could talk about level triggering later on if you guys want to. So, the last bit here is that because Kubernetes is a scheduler and you can make your programs run, you can describe to it to say, hey, run additional controllers. Some of the core Kubernetes components actually run in this way. We actually use Kubernetes to run parts of Kubernetes. And because you can extend the API, you can actually create your own controllers and put them into the cluster. And this helps you build resilient systems on your own terms with a very solid pattern, right? And then let's just remember that that's all based off the fact that you have the consistent storage. And so we have this growing ecosystem, right? We got Kubernetes controllers. They're encoding patterns that are safe and scale, right? This isn't just some bash script that's changing your load balancer inside of a continuous integration script, right? Like from over the internet with the lossy internet connection, right? And so people are realizing this, and projects and vendors are saying, hey, that API over there looks like a pretty good language, right? With a really solid ecosystem, people who are doing things in a really good way. So let's extend Kubernetes. And they add their own APIs and they build their own controllers to implement those APIs so you can run them yourself. On top of that, not only do we have the projects and the ecosystem from a software standpoint, but we're building a workforce. We're building a community of certified, excited practitioners that understand and honestly love these APIs integrations. I know that when I first touched a container scheduler, and mine was Docker Swarm, I realized that it could remove a lot of pain for me. And maybe some of you can relate. Feel free to drop in the chat and we can take a break before the next section and address questions or comments. But I realized that a lot of my time at work was spent doing things that I did not need to be doing. And that I could help empower people if we could build some solutions and platforms, if we could build habits, if we could change the way that we communicate, the way that we collab, if we could do more things through pull request, that we could be faster, safer, better. We could be excellent. And I think that that's key. People want to feel excellent. And so it's important to look not only at the software, but the fact that we're building people. We're building a massive community of folks who want to do things in this way. And I think that's a huge reason to consider as to why you would potentially want to use Kubernetes. So let's talk about GitOps a little bit. What is GitOps and why is it important in the Kubernetes world? GitOps is a way of habitually using your version control system to extend beyond the software lifecycle. See, when you hear about SDLC, software development lifecycle, in the past couple decades, we've gotten pretty good. It's gone through several stages of maturity. And now we do things, with version control. We know how to collaborate with each other. There are incredible providers on top of Git that improve workflows so that we can have access control. We can, help review each other's code in really fancy UX. We have test runners. We've got UX teams. We have QA teams. We have acceptance testing. We have regression testing. And there's this whole maturity cycle, right, where you're graduating code, you're pushing change in a collaborative environment. And there's a lot of work and study on how to do software properly. I don't really perceive that we have made the same aggressive steps in maturity for infrastructure and systems management. And I think that GitOps is a key part in stepping forward. It is a step in maturity in the models that we as practitioners, as part of a global community, accept on the good way to run software, to run a business on systems. And when you look at Kubernetes and the attributes that it provides, right, to a system, to managing that system, and you fuse it with some of the things that we've learned from software lifecycle, you can get to a point where from the top to the bottom, not just the software portion, but how you run it can be versioned. And then you can assert, hey, like, we are reasonably sure that the system was compliant and in this state at this time because of the way that we do things, in the same way that you can assert those things about your software. Git is the tool for collaboration, right? It's widely adopted, right? And maybe you want to swap out Git for Subversion or something here, right? But ultimately, when you're using version control, Git and the tools that we use around it help us answer this fundamental question. What changed? I'll just come out and say that Kubernetes doesn't answer this question for you. Git is a place where we can form familiar workflows around change. Now that we can answer what change, we can propose change. Right? We can munge with it. We can determine, hey, we're doing a release. We're changing the number of replicas. We're adding some security flags. We're rate limiting the ingress. We're adding this, right? And then we can propose like, hey, I don't like this, or hey, have we considered doing this? We can collaborate in our Git providers tools to make sure that we understand what is happening. And on top of that, we have things like access control, right? And so if you're using something like GitHub, GitLab, Atlassian solutions, you've got teams, permissions, you can set up constraints for reviews in particular folders. You can prevent people from merging to the master branch without reviews. You can integrate with a build system to make sure that the build is passing and that your continuous integration is green, right? That your code coverage is high. You can start implementing policy in your build system and your continuous integration systems to ensure that not only your software, but your infrastructure config is healthy. In fact, we actually do this in our enterprise product. There's a great project called Gatekeeper, which allows you to write policies against all of your Kubernetes config. And you can catch that stuff ahead of time before it even applies to your cluster. Right? And so we've got this declarative API, which means that we can store all of the desired state inside of our version control repository. And this helps preserve and communicate change as we collaborate together to operate the system that keeps all of our assets running. There's another important thing here that's not often mentioned, but when you put an object into Kubernetes, it actually inflates, right? And so all of the defaults start to get populated into the object, right? And it is machine serialized. And so even though you might see the output as YAML in kubectl, it's actually stored in JSON, right? And then the system starts operating on it, right? So there's often a status object. It'll add IDs and references. It'll add a cluster ID, perhaps. That's something that's being added. And then, the deployment controller says, hey, this is up to date, and I made these replica sets that tie to this, and I'm going to create more objects that are related to this and owned by it. And that's all useful for the system, but now the system has taken some ownership of your description. All right, and so while it's respecting what you've asked, it's actually added on. And you should always keep the minimal representation of what you want to describe. And you should store that in Git, in my opinion. Git will have the minimal representation of your configs with your comments and in the order of the fields that you've described with white space. And it's contextualized by your Git log. Right? So the history serves as an indicator to, hey, this merged from this pull request. And this enables you to hold on to exactly what you mean, or exactly what some person that you never even met meant, right? Somebody who doesn't work here anymore. It enables looking at and restoring old versions, doing things like deployment and rollback. See, now, when you're using Kubernetes with its domain over many systems, everything about your infrastructure, more or less, is versioned in a way that everyone, that whole practitioner community, can and wants to understand. Right? And so you have repeatability in your deployments and in your provisioning of the infrastructure. You've got rollbacks basically for free because the patterns in the deployment controller are so good already that you don't have to do anything special. So you no longer need a person to spend that 2 weeks making sure that you have a zero downtime deployment if you follow the tenets of the talk that I released. You should go watch that if you're having downtime in your deployments, even if you're using Kubernetes, because it's not default. But anyway, and then you can do things like postmortems, right? So you can examine what changed, within the past week, and if you're having an increased error rate, then you can go look at it, potentially addressing some of those changes. And this gives you the ability to do things like disaster recovery exercises. In fact, we like to tell a story about how at Weaveworks, we wanted to really put GitOps to the test, and we deleted the entire company's infrastructure and brought it back up within the hour. I think it was actually like 35 minutes or something like that. You can go look at some of the talks by our CEO, Alexis Richardson. He really enjoys bringing up that story as a demonstration of the value of GitOps. Right? And so most people aren't thinking about DR every day, but I can assure you that if your business provides value to somebody, if it's pulling in incredible revenue, if it's something that you cherish and care about because you built it, or maybe not even your business, but just you're a practitioner and you care about the systems that you run, then you should think about how you could bring it all up again if something bad happened. And that's a very comfortable place to be. Once you know that you can recover from a complete disaster, you can bring things up from square zero. You're feeling good. That's a business continuity thing. And so, yes, workload density is a very powerful reason, right? And then portability across clouds and those kinds of things. These are very common reasons that people bring up for justifying the spend necessary to make Kubernetes happen as you go up leadership. But I would encourage you to really think about how you could communicate the true value of GitOps and Kubernetes to your peers, to the folks who have a stake in making the right decisions, because it's more than just money. It's more than just density and portability, right? You're going to see increased velocity from the collaboration, from the enablement of your security interests that come from working in a GitOps way, right? And yes, spend is a component, but I think that ultimately you're going to see safety and happiness that comes out of this. It's going to help you be excellent, help you work in a better way. If you're ready to take the plunge, I'd be happy to chat more. So, yeah. The quip here is a great little statement about the strength of Kubernetes and GitOps together. Right? GitOps and Kubernetes means that your new teams don't need to re-architect an entire system just because nobody's around anymore that knows how it's built, deployed, or even supposed to work. So I think that'll save you more than $1 million. Yeah. Thanks. And I'd be happy to chat more.
Cool, thanks. Well, we've got a couple of people on both sides. Does anybody have any questions? You'd be interested to learn, where are you in your interest of GitOps? We had a few people in the YouTube chat who seem like they have some setup going pretty well, but Lee, some of the genesis of this talk is you were talking about how, we've been a good amount of time in the Kubernetes community, and obviously the people who are out there evangelizing Kubernetes, helping people get started, but you felt that somehow maybe we're deep in the weeds and some of this maybe gets lost, some of this value of why Kubernetes. And that's why you were passionate about putting together this talk. You want to share a little bit about that background?
Yeah, I mean, Kubernetes is a big moving force now, and not everybody's that's involved with the project has had to use it before, and not everyone that's involved with the project. Fundamentally, this is a good thing actually about Kubernetes is we invite new people and people from different disciplines to contribute, and those people bring amazing perspectives. But it's healthy as well to mobilize and listen to the practitioners. This is a word that we always used in the Puppet community. It's the value of the person that does the actual thing. When you look at DevOps as a movement, there's a lot of talk about that bottom-up leadership because things often change, especially when you get into the glue and friction of a big enterprise environment like where I came from. It can be difficult unless you have the people who are actually doing the thing just decide to do it differently. And in order to incite change, you need to feel inspiration. You need to understand reason. You need to build consensus. And I think that I've just sensed, folks, overhearing through conversation, speaking with folks in our local community here, as well as at, our international conferences, that it's not always understood why and what the value could be if you were to move everything that you do to these new paradigms. So that's really where it came from. Yeah. It's
Yeah, I was posting in the chats among the people here. Are people already using Kubernetes today, or some of you still thinking about it and thought maybe this would also mean or provide some information on what to be thinking about? That was definitely part of our goal here. And I noticed there's a chunk of new people. So if you just joined, a little background here, we're planning a GitOps Days event next month, but we thought we'd do a series of these community specials, about one per week, to test out different platforms, to put out some information. So it's pretty loose here, and we might be ironing out some kinks. So we'd love that you guys are joining. And if you have any requests, any feedback, any advice on different types of platforms and preferences, that this is totally a community special to hear your thoughts. So on YouTube, we have Philip saying that he's running Kubernetes in production today. So that's good. And I think I just want to not confuse you with the other Philip we were joking about, but you definitely have a pretty advanced setup today, it seems. Double checking. Oh yeah, and you're already using Flux with Kubernetes in production. Are you using Flux in production as well? Running production workloads on EKS. So you're an EKS user. Do you use EKS Cuddle, which is another thing that our team here at Weaveworks and Developer Experience created. Now have an entire engineering team around. If you haven't heard of EKS Cuddle, you've probably heard of AWS EKS. In the early days when it came out, one of the people who was on the DX team is Ilya Dmitrichenko. And I think it maybe started as a weekend project where he thought, oh, you have some early access to this, and maybe they could use a little help on the onboarding process. He started building EKS Cuddle as a type of EKS CLI. And one thing led to another, and now it's the official CLI for EKS. And yeah, we have a whole engineering team around that for people who are looking for enterprise level help. So it's pretty exciting to see where small innovations turn into really official things. So yes, I see Philip's running Kubernetes, running workloads on EKS. So curious about that. Did anybody have any other questions? Yes, looking at the chats. Anybody have, if people used Flux? Bailey, Philip had mentioned Flux, and use EKS Cuddle for personal projects. Okay, so Philip's sharing that for the production and work stuff. It uses Terraform with EKS. Makes sense. Yeah, actually, maybe we can dig up one of those talks, because we had a friend who was interested in EKS Cuddle, because he was out at one of the KubeCons and was talking about, I think he was using Terraform with EKS, and someone's like, oh, you got to try out EKS Cuddle. You know, it's definitely got some GitOpsy capabilities there. And so we were chatting about that, and I think we did turn that into a talk. Maybe we can add that here if people are interested. It's not like we have any particular strong position, whether you should Terraform for some things or EKS Cuddle for some of its capabilities, but it was something that somebody was asking about. So maybe that's a talk that we can put here in our GitOps Days community special for future events. I'm just looking at the chat here, because Daniel's also asked about this. Definitely, we have profile bits and GitOps capabilities that Daniel's sharing about for EKS Cuddle. Yeah, it's been pretty exciting to see, like I said, that project go from sort of a weekend project into this whole thing with the development team and new features coming out. So that's been pretty cool. Any others? We're talking about how people are using Flux and EKS. Is anybody else using Flux at all, or using it in production, or using EKS together with it? We don't have a particular angle on that, but always interested to hear people's environments. And if not, then, oh, we have someone uses Flex Helm operator with and sealed secrets on EKS in production. So another EKS user. How is that working out for you?
Yeah.
We don't have Stefan today, but he obviously spends a lot of effort on that together with our Flux engineers. Any bugs, any improvements? Look into that. So I'm going to add, I mentioned earlier, we created an email address. So it's gitops@weave.works. And yeah, hope I posted that to everybody. Post it here too. We thought maybe you can obviously reach out to us on various social channels, or we have a Slack channel. But if something comes up with these GitOps days where you have just a piece of feedback that you'd like to share with us, or some questions that come up later, feel free to reach out to us on that. Oh, okay. So we have Wellington, who's also using Flux. You want to share a little bit? Are you using it in production? Are you having issues with it? Are you fairly new to it? And so, yeah, Vincent over here says everything is working. If the Flux Helm operator is working like a charm, that's great. A few things that are touchy. What that's typo, the initial secrets of sealed secrets and patching RBAC for Flux and Helm operator.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I really like sealed secrets, but that everything does need to be bootstrapped in the secret world, right? So if you need PKI, the way that sealed secrets work is you have asymmetric encryption. The decrypt key is in the cluster, the encrypt key you can check into the repository, right? And then you can selectively encrypt fields, and that can be a little bit tricky as part of the bootstrapping portion. Yeah, Omar also mentions Vault, and I'm personally not very experienced with Vault, but it's obviously a very widely adopted solution for secrets management. Personally, I've always just used the one that came with the cloud. We didn't have a secret store for our platform back when I was working on Vert. Oh, actually, at Beatport, we would use OnePass. We'd use the OP-CLI tool to hydrate secrets. That was kind of interesting. Yeah.
And Omar's sharing one of our links on FAQs. How do you manage secrets?
I'll pop that over to our YouTube as well. And,
Yeah, Vault definitely does come up a bit. I know that our team looks at it. Wellington says, I had issues with race conditions when trying to add things like cert manager.
using Flux, right? The CRD bootstrap.
So this section, go ahead.
That's a funky part about extending Kubernetes is you do get into an ordering problem when adding add-ons to the cluster. We talk about this a lot in the add-ons working group, actually. Daniel and I are both part of that conversation every 2 weeks. Come join the add-ons, or sorry, it's a sub-project of SIG Cluster Lifecycle sometime if you want to chat more about the problem or the solutions to these kinds of problems.
Yeah.
So.
Actually, yeah, I was thinking this is a good moment to give a little background for some people who've also joined. So hopefully you saw in the description that Lee is one of our developer experience engineers based in Denver, Colorado, and Daniel Holbach is one of our community managers based in Berlin. And as you mentioned, you guys are involved in these SIGs and working groups, and maybe you can share a little bit about, I know it's been a very patient, long process, but what have you guys been helping the Kubernetes community in this particular area?
Yeah, this has been an exciting place to collaborate. The thing about add-ons is that everyone wants their thing put into, whatever solution becomes adopted by the upstream. Or maybe adopted's not the right word, but proposed or contributed to the ecosystem by the upstream. And one thing that's been wonderful about that is that we have a very broad range of people from different companies and organizations and projects who are joining the add-ons working group. And so some things that we have been working on are, the first is at the very bottom of the stack, which is in cluster bootstrap. And so that exact problem of ordering when you can install an API into Kubernetes so that you can start using it. And then getting the thing in there, to actually be able to operate it. So installing the controller, right, or the application, or the CNI, or the CSI bits that are necessary to make your storage interface run. Right. That is add-on installer configuration, which is a extensible component config style API that people can use to change the way that installers behave. So installers like kubedm or kops, or even the cluster API is a proposal we're looking at. We are working in that space. The other bit is actually in operators. So when it gets difficult to manage the application in a declarative way, because there are stateful things, about it, you can graduate some of the declarative statements you can make about that application, such as perform a database backup, every week, or, perform this upgrade. And you can add an operator into the mix that will do the imperative things that you would have done yourself for you, based off of a scripted policy. And so there is some work that's now being done to make it easier to build operators for add-ons, specifically things at the low-level cluster infrastructure layer. And there's also an OCI packaging KEP, which is an enhancement proposal for Kubernetes. And we would like to see some improvement in the packaging of the add-ons themselves. And so Kubernetes has a great API, but one thing that's very lacking is the ability to group objects together and talk about them as a single thing throughout their whole life cycle, right? So from before they're inside of the cluster to, as you're managing them inside of the cluster, the only thing you have is namespaces and owner refs. And so building a more mature packaging layer that everyone's willing to use and deciding what the transport and storage methods for those are is another interesting area that the add-ons group is working on. Yeah, I think that we're making good progress. We're actually doing Google Summer of Code this year as well, so we'll have some folks joining under the guidance and mentorship of some of our more tenured contributors.
Oh.
Come join and talk. I mean, all of the Kubernetes calls, aside from the exception of like CVE calls, like in SIG security, are public. You can find the Google Doc, you can join the Google group. Some of them kind of do require that you have a Google account or some email that's tied to a Google group. So that is a little bit of a requirement. If you're having trouble joining, please just DM us or send us an email. And I'd be happy to help you get involved. So.
Daniel, how has been your experience been?
Yeah, I wanted to echo what Lee said. So my experience was that for some time I was looking for ways to get involved with Kubernetes upstream, and back then I think Ilya pointed to me to an ancient bug report about let's figure out add-ons, and every installer and every distribution figured out their own add-on mechanism, and there was just no standard way to do it. And I thought, like, okay, sounds interesting, but I'm not sure if I know enough to, facilitate discussions or anything, but I just help with logistics. And it was very interesting to see how friendly everyone was, like how many people showed up, like from Google, from Red Hat, VMware, like from all these companies. And a lot of them had like little bits of pre-existing work, and we figured out like how could this work? Like what would the what is an add-on? What happens to the add-on if we upgrade Kubernetes? What happens in an air-gapped scenario? Like all these questions. And I certainly learned a lot. Like people have different workflows, they use different tools for development, and even as a bystander, like I don't write code in Kubernetes. I felt like I could help out, and my contributions were welcome there. So I really enjoyed the experience so far. Yeah, and it is a thing where it is just a process that takes very long, because there's just so many different working groups and other SIGs involved. Like, and also you need to consider a lot of long-term questions. So for example, if we say, okay, we have this add-on installer mechanism, and that's supposed to go into all these different Kubernetes installers like kubeadm. There's some pre-existing work. Can this be thrown out? And what happens? Who's going to maintain that little part? And you already talked to that other team, and suddenly you're in like 4 different calls, talking to 4 different groups and trying to convince them of something. So that's super, super interesting, and you get to know a lot of interesting people. So sometimes it takes a bit longer than expected, but it's certainly worth it. Like, it feels rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you are trying to build something for such a large community, right? Even just giving everyone the chance to join a call to share their opinion or comment on a Google Doc requires some significant time, because you're not just going to get answers by walking into somebody's cubicle to ask them a question about what they think. You have to wait for them to wake up and have some free time. One thing that I have so much respect for contributors in the Kubernetes community is there are a significant number of people who are either working for free or working on terms where much of what they do is not exactly what they're getting paid for. And so the service that is put in by the maintainers and contributors is really a massive one to the community. And just a lot of thanks for, particularly I'm thinking of Component Standard right now, which is a working group that I co-lead with Mike Taufin from Google, who he and I have put in a lot of work to help identify and welcome people who are not contributing to the project to do some of the hardest and most boring work available. And yeah, it's been very humbling and also exciting to work with folks who are just breaking into the community and figuring out how can you enable people to do what they want to do. It's a neat space to be working in.
So yeah, if any of you are interested in participating, these guys are definitely the examples of patience, persistence, understanding the vision, collaborating with people in the community, just really, having the desire to help as well. So I think that that is a great part of being part of the community and moving some, great technology forward. So thanks to you both.
Yeah, and just to tack on to that, the same is true for many of the projects we lead. Like, so if you're interested in Flux, for example, or like for many of the projects we do regular community meetings or you can just show up on Slack and just ask around. So for Flux, we have meetings for Scope, Ignite, QD, Grafana like, because I run a lot of those meetings, I remember them. And it's just a great way to show up, say like, I love this project. Can I help with anything, or just get to know the people?
Yeah, definitely.
I certainly learn a lot there.
Awesome. Yeah. And as he's posted on the YouTube chat, yes. If you want to have any involvement in Flux or have any feedback, we're the team to hear it from you. I'm also having ideas of maybe we'd have coding sprints where we have Daniel's music in the background.
I'm gonna go to that.
Yeah. Probably recorded so you don't have to work, but yeah, so we could have a preset track and it'd be awesome. So on that note, we have a little break, and we'll give Daniel a moment to get started, and we'll be back at the top of the hour for the GitOps hands-on demo. So thanks, guys.
Sweet. Yeah, in the meantime, I changed some of the settings because some folks said that the volume changed. If this is too loud or too low, let me know. I'll just try it out and see what happens.
Yes, please let us know in the chats. And yes, we got some people using Flux as well, so we'll answer those questions. Thanks.
It's all around you. Ain't nothing you can do. It's a heat wave, babe. No, you can fight it. Try and isolate you. Heat wave, babe. It's all around you. Ain't nothing you can do. It's a heat wave, babe. No, you can't fight it. Try and isolate you. It'll lead you, baby, yeah. You've been searching for a place to ease the pain. So let's explore the sound system's multiple game. Such no more. Finally, I can re-explore heaven never knew. Feel the sound system pounding you. I don't need to search no more. Finally, I can re-explore heaven never knew. Feel the sound system pounding you. You've been searching for a place to ease the pain. So let's explore the sound system's multiple game. You've been searching for a place to ease the pain. So let's explore the sound system's multiple game. Such no more. Finally, I can re-explore heaven never knew. Feel the sound system pounding you. I don't need to search no more. Finally, I can re-explore heaven never knew. Feel the sound system pounding you. Check it out, this one, check it out, check it out, this swing to the right, swing to the right, make it feel good, feel alright. 1, 2, 3, swing to the right, make it feel good, feel alright. 1, 2, 3, swing to the right, make it feel good, feel alright. 1, 2, 3, swing to the right, feel good, feel alright. 1, 2, 3, swing to the right, feel good, feel alright. 1, 2, 3,
Let's do it.
This is always very painful. I had to figure out this solution. I just basically want to listen to this for the next hour.
I should figure out how to stream some Beat Saber for our Twitch stream.
My impression was that Daniel wasn't doing this for a while, but it doesn't seem rusty at all.
Can't sleep. Can't breathe.
Here's Hey, Daniel. Can you hear us? Oh, you didn't have to kill it. I was just saying, I wish we could just listen to that for the rest of the hour. This was just a fun idea. And now it's just like, oh, I'd rather do this instead. Cool. Well, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, well, like I said, this is our first practice run ever. We'll figure out different ideas for this, because maybe we need a whole separate show, or we'll have a coding session or something, because that's really fun. It's really been nice. And Daniel, I know it's very late for you, so you are welcome to sign off if you'd like to, as we go through our last 50 minutes here. So we really appreciate people taking the time in our team across the world to just try out this fun thing. So Lee, we were going to do a GitOps hands-on. You're messaging us saying you're having a little bit of challenge with EKS. So what are your thoughts? We were talking about some live coding sessions in general anyway. We could try different things. Or
Yeah,
do
I
people
definitely
want to
have
troubleshoot?
plenty things I can show. And I just logged into a fresh AWS account. So
Okay.
it's in the middle of the cluster creation right now. So we could get to talking at least about the workshop and then show how
Yes.
you could go through it on your own pace.
Definitely
So
start.
yeah,
it's
the first time I've had to plead to the demo gods for a while. So it's kind of, my time is up anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll put in the chat for everybody. We put it in the description, but this is the, so I can hold up right side. I think it's actually in the, sorry about that. It's in the description, but I want to make sure I put it in the chat as well. So here's our GitOps hands-on. And thanks to Simon. Simon's enjoying the music. Hope that works. So as we mentioned, some of you might know Stefan, who's on our team here, Stefan Prodden, who created the GitOps hands-on. We are building out future ones. This one just happens to be on EKS. Yeah, we when things get normal, we can see each other in person. We actually have a t-shirt that if you complete it, you get a t-shirt. It's listed on the website. But for now, we'll just help people kind of get started with GitOps. There's a form that's linked on the site. So definitely if you can, oh yes, Lee's got a shirt. If you can fill out the form and let us know who you are, that's we'll be very grateful, because in that way we can kind of see where people are learning on GitOps and want to get help, and maybe what their next steps might be. And this is a purely open source version. I should say a little bit about our company, Weaveworks. We are a startup based in London, San Francisco, Berlin, Denver, and New York, as well as distributed teams. We have a ton of open source stuff, as some of you already know about us. But we also do have an enterprise edition of a GitOps ready enterprise platform. So if you're looking to get started with Kubernetes and you want GitOps already on an enterprise level available, or if you are advanced but you like more GitOps capabilities, that's some of what we do. So Weave.works, which is our name, but with a dot in between is our website. And this GitOps hands-on is sort of an open source version that gets you started. So it definitely doesn't have enterprise level capabilities, but it definitely gives you sort of a taste of how it might be to experience if you've read about GitOps, but you've never really been able to have like a hands-on experience. This is something that Stefan created to do that. And it includes Flagger, which means that you have also very cloud native and Kubernetes way of doing a canary deployment. It also leverages Flux. So you'll kind of get a taste of that. So I'm not sure if we'll have time to go through the whole thing, but hopefully Lee can sort of explain the hands-on a little bit and at least help you get started. And so then you can connect with us later on Slack if you get stuck or are interested to learn more. Is that a good intro?
Yeah. Okay, friends. So hopefully things are going well, but I don't know if they are.
And if they aren't, this is a community special, so you can help us troubleshoot with getting EKS going.
Yeah.
We've definitely got people who are EKS experienced.
I'm not even seeing any EC2 machines coming up yet, which is not a great sign, but maybe, no, maybe it'll work. I'll share my screen and you guys can look at what I'm looking at. All right. So I'm creating a cluster, and this usually takes about 15 minutes. It's probably about like 7 minutes left. It's going to be my guess. So let's chat a little bit about the workshop. Now, I'm a huge fan of this workshop. I've run this probably 6 or 7 times now. And I think that there's a pretty incredible amount of solid content. Honestly, I can't believe that we just give away this workshop for free. It's at EKS hands-on Flagger dev, or we drop the bit.ly link inside of the YouTube chat. So feel free to go and follow along at your own pace. I'm sure Amazon has the capacity for, you know, all of us to be creating EKS clusters. Just as a heads up, yeah, so you can run this all from your laptop, and it's going to create a cluster in a cloud. You'll need an account with AWS and to configure the AWS CLI. And probably costs about $7 to run for 2 days. So if you ran it just this afternoon and then followed the cleanup instructions, which we have tested, the cleanup instructions work properly in a fresh account, and you don't get any recurring billing. So it is safe to run, and you can always just delete the account as well if you just make a brand new one. And it shouldn't cost you more than like $1 to run for an afternoon. So feel free to jump in and follow along. You might be a little bit behind with all of the setup steps. But maybe not, because I'm waiting for my cluster to get created right now. So this is our GitOps challenge. As Tamao mentioned, we have the dope t-shirts. I should have worn one actually, but at least I have them under my desk here. So it's our cuttlefish logo. And if you ever find us in person, we will give you one of these, especially if you did the workshop. So I don't know. This was our prize for KubeCon. They were very exclusive. People wanted them, but we only gave them to people who did the stuff with EKS, GitOps, and Flagger. And so that's the premise of the workshop. And so the challenge, right, is to go through and yeah, you know, we have the shirt and everything. But if you click Get Started, then we have the intro. And we already had a talk about what GitOps kind of is, but if you need some background material, or if you're just joining us now, then you know GitOps is a way of constantly converging a described state of your Kubernetes cluster based off of a Git repository, and that's in the context of Kubernetes, but it can be used, you know, with other technologies like Puppet or Terraform as well. And we personally at Weaveworks do use a GitOps workflow with Terraform for things like managing our GitHub teams and repos and permissions. So it's just an example of GitOps outside of Kubernetes. Today, we'll also be demoing a little bit of Amazon EKS using EKS Cuddle. And then we're going to be doing some progressive delivery on top of this buzzword, which is called a service mesh. And so it's pretty exciting stuff. Amazon actually provides a hosted service mesh called App Mesh. And Stefan Pradhan, who built the majority of this workshop with me, he's actually what I would consider a key contributor to the App Mesh team. And so we collaborate, Weaveworks and AWS together. App Mesh is a great AWS product that is built on top of Envoy. Envoy is a CNCF dynamically configurable load balancer. It's a CNCF project now. And yeah, what is progressive delivery? So in the DevOps world, we've been talking about like red, black, or blue-green deployments, you know, from thought leaders in that space like Netflix for quite a while. And you might have also heard of like canary deployments or releases. And progressive delivery is this industry term that's now developing that encompasses all of these techniques into a formal discipline. And what the value add of progressive delivery is that if you're at a certain level of engineering maturity where you can measure, like you have the prerequisites met for zero downtime deployments already, so you're already able to release to live production traffic with, you know, minimal or no impact, and you already can measure things. So your deployment automation or, you know, whatever systems you're using are mature enough, then you can now start creating some hypothesis about your deployments, and you can add additional safety using a progressive delivery operator. And it will allow you to do like canary deployments or test hypothesis with A/B testing and that kind of thing. And yeah, there's a great blog post here for Kubernetes anti-patterns, GitOps versus CIOps, as well as a great blog post by Martin Fowler on progressive delivery. So some background content there. The other bit here is if you're just getting started with and you haven't already found the prerequisites, feel free to jump on and join along. You can run all these commands with me. You'll need the AWS CLI along with Git on your machine. And then we have had some people run through this lab on Windows with mixed success rates. So just let me know if you're on Windows. We can do a little bit of debugging. And then you'll need kubectl just to inspect the cluster. So we're not going to be doing any write operations to the cluster with kubectl at all, but we'll be using it from a read-only context in order to look at what's happening inside to validate our suspicions so that we can inspect whether or not GitOps has been bootstrapped properly and see that it's actually having the affected changes that we want in the cluster, as well as doing things like reading logs and checking for the status of our deployments. And then you'll need the AWS CLI. You'll need some way to authenticate with it. I recommend using AWS IAM Authenticator. What this will do is it'll interact with kubectl to help. It's just a little tiny Go program that gets the proper tokens necessary for you to authenticate with your EKS cluster. And then I will be using GitHub. as the Git repo provider, I'm just going to be using a public repository, but you could use a private one, no problem with that. And then the EKS Cuddle binary. EKS Cuddle is a really cool project. Just a little plug here. So if you haven't heard of it before, we have a great logo, which, as we stated in the previous talk, is a great prerequisite. And yeah, basically just one command, and it turns what was previously a complicated process into some pretty wonderful UX for getting Kubernetes ready in your Amazon environment. Some great things about EKS: the control plane is hosted for you, so you don't have to pay for the infrastructure necessary to run it. You just pay for the cluster itself. And then, yeah, I mean, it's got great integrations with Amazon's cloud provider. And I mean that from a Kubernetes context. So like when you use EKS Cuddle, everything's going to be set up in the way that's going to get you the maximum amount of integration that you need necessary for things like IAM from your cluster, as well as, you know, like being able to work with app mesh and that kind of thing. And then, yeah, another wonderful thing about EKS is that, or I mean, EKS Cuddle is that it is declaratively driven by a Kubernetes style API. So this isn't Kubernetes, but it is Kubernetes API machinery that's being used so that you can say, check this cluster configuration into a Git repo along with everything that you are describing about what's supposed to be inside of it, right? So this is the bootstrapping and provisioning portion of GitOps. How can I make sure that I can basically get the same exact infrastructure again so that I can go and ensure that all of my infrastructure requirements are met, right? And this starts out as a very minimal config, but if you kind of churn through the issues and comments, we have a great user community of people who provide their own configs. You can do everything from overriding VPC and subnet and IAM IDs. You can provide your own network ranges and that kind of thing. You can get very verbose, right? And so this is a great abstraction because the interface is not leaky. But if you only provide it with the defaults, then it is powerful for the 80% use case. So compliments to the EKS Cuddle team. Also, we have all of our other friends here. Right, here's the Kubernetes mustache guy, the bow tie mohawk guy. You got the soda person. Is this Chloe Condon? No. Anyway.
It could be.
It's the glasses, right? I mean,
Yes.
you know Chloe.
Yes.
She wears these glasses, right?
Yes.
And yeah. So go ahead, download EKS Cuddle, play with EKS. It's pretty nice, slick tool. That's the Linux installation instructions that I just copied and pasted to upgrade. You know, probably about an hour ago, I guess. I was running an older version, so. And then, yeah, if you are having trouble setting up your AWS credentials, there is a little pointer in here. Sometimes it's hard to find the docs for this. So go ahead and get that all set up. And then the last bit that you'll need beyond EKS Cuddle is we're not going to be using a Flux webhook here. So in order to make your experimentation a little bit speedier, I recommend having the Flux Cuddle command line tool. And this will just allow you to make sure to just poke Flux inside of the cluster to update with the repository, so then you have to wait for the reconciliation loop. Normally, the solution to this in production is to install the Flux receive webhook, which if you're using Flux but you're not using this yet, it is a recommendable component to install in your cluster and expose to the internet. It is a separate sidecar component that you would decorate your Flux deployment with. And so it'll live on localhost inside of the same pod with FluxD. And you just expose an ingress to this so that you're not exposing the entire Flux API. And then it's authenticated webhook with whatever your provider is. We currently support GitHub, Docker Hub, Quay for the image push events, and then GitLab Bitbucket for the Git providers. Oh, and then GitHub is on here as well. What am I saying? Yeah. We should reorder this. I should submit a patch for that. But yeah, image push, we also have GCR support. And that'll just speed up the feedback that you're getting from using your Git repository, but it's completely optional. So if your webhook goes down or the webhook events provider, such as like Docker Hub's like not sending you events all of a sudden, you'll still have the Flux sync period that's kicking in. And yeah, let's go check on our cluster creation. We're still deploying a stack, but it looks like, are we on the second stack here yet? Just on the default node group. Just checking in, see. I don't see any instances popping up yet. Okay. Okay. Well, that would be the first step. So now we're in the waiting period. And hopefully this is not blocked by anything in like a billing account or something. I'd hate to have to debug like AWS billing stuff. Just as a background, if you joined us just a little bit late, I was having some problems on the AWS account I was using, so I made a new one. And does anyone know if you don't have credit, if you can start creating resources, or do I need to set up billing first? Never had to deal with that before.
And if you've just joined us, we're saying this is sort of our practice edition of this show. So we'll be a little bit unpolished here. And we have quite a few people who do use EKS. So I was wondering if maybe some people knew we could use this as a debugging session. But,
yeah. Don't have another screen here. But I suppose it doesn't really matter if I'm stop the share to go look at billing really quick.
Noticed some people who've joined new. So this is one sort of a series that we're going to do once a week leading up to an event that we're preparing called GitOps Days in May. So that'll be sort of a little bit more of a formal 2-day online event. We'll kind of talk about intro to GitOps for people who are interested at a high level. We'll do some deep dives on different technologies. So we decided we'd do these community sessions that we would use to test out different platforms and content and stuff. So if you have any requests on anything you'd like to see during this series, please send us a note. I put an email earlier. It's gitops@weave.works. So hopefully that's easy to remember, gitops@weave.works. If any of you are on Zoom, you will get an email from us as well, which will probably come from me. So you can always just email me directly if you love a talk on a particular topic, or if you're stuck in a certain area and you'd really like to learn more. Or we've had a couple people come and say, hey, you know, I really get this GitOps concept. I'd really like to help get my whole team or my company on board with this. I'd really like to move it forward. So if you have any kind of requests like that, please let us know. And so, like I said, in the meantime, these weekly community events, we're going to be doing them kind of on different days and times. So you can also request what dates and times might work for you in your time zone. We'll put whatever content you're interested in learning more about around GitOps. So yeah, let us know. And we have some people trying to help, saying I only have a AWS business account, so I'm not sure if I can help with that bit. I don't know if it's a billing issue. It seems like that would have popped up earlier, but that's just my guess.
Yeah, you would think, right? I mean, I was able to create an EKS cluster resource, right? So that it is here. Just make that a little bigger. And, but yeah, I mean, I feel like unless I'm missing something here, normally you would see some instances coming up since we are deploying a stack that has a node group in it. I could poke around in the console a little bit.
I'm also going to pull up when you did the hands-on before. those of you.
Can you
Yes.
stop my screen share for a sec? Zoom is not letting me click it.
Oh, how weird.
Maybe just take sharing.
Oh, wait, hold on. I do not want to do that. It's weird. It's not letting you stop sharing.
Yeah, I updated the Zoom client so I could
Oh,
play
yes.
with the virtual background thing, and
Stacey.
now I can no longer click buttons. So
Okay, Stacey is our host.
So I allowed you to stop sharing now, but I'm not sure.
So now Lee, you can stop sharing. That's kind of a weird thing that.
I never didn't have the button. It just the button's on my screen and it just doesn't want me to click it. It's something that would normally work, but the new client has just been buggy. I think it has something to do with full screen, but Linux display manager stuff.
Okay. So I guess I could do this just to pull it away from you.
Yeah, that should work. Share something. That way I can go look at my AWS
this.
account. Thanks.
And in the meantime,
Held hostage. Yeah.
Yes, let me share with everybody. We do have a walkthrough that Lee did, I guess, about a month ago. And so here's this one. And okay, now I got to dig it up over on this side or type it up. For some reason, the last link I posted in the YouTube live chat didn't come up as a link, just text. So sorry, I got to type this up. Oh,
I was
did you
able
get
to
it?
copy paste.
Oh, you're able to copy paste.
Yeah, got it.
So yeah, so like I said, sometimes these things happen. We don't know why it's not spinning up, but we do have this one where he did do the walkthrough of the GitOps hands-on. So yeah, Lee, let us know. No biggie if we feel like we just want to wrap up here, unless people have further questions. We can save it for next time, do another walkthrough. And also was curious, the video that we have, obviously Lee just sort of does the walkthrough and we don't wait for people if they got stuck. If people are interested, we can certainly do one. It's always a little bit of a challenge online. See if some people moved ahead and some people are stuck, but we can certainly help walk people through the hands-on in a very detailed manner. Is the Zoom option not working? I'm not sure what you mean, Roy. Let us know what you mean. Thanks for asking a question. Well, we stopped sharing the screen in Zoom so Lee's laptop would stop spinning and heating up because it's trying to do something. So maybe that's what your question is about. But currently, we're just trying to figure out why EKS is taking a while, because it usually doesn't take this long, right?
No, yeah, I haven't been able to successfully create a cluster all morning. It seems like something service related potentially.
Oh, okay. Well,
but
maybe
it's,
we can.
Yeah, is anyone? I mean, if anyone else is following along, please ping if you were able to create a cluster. Otherwise, we might have to open an issue or something.
That's the case, then I think maybe we could just wrap up the broadcast and we can do it next time. I think so. We're aiming for a date next week. We were creating a schedule around the 23rd, early in our time in California. to have Stefan join and go through, like I said, he loves to talk. So he'll be going through sort of the deep details about Flux and Flagger. Oh, Peter is saying that he has the same problem. So maybe we are having an AWS issue right now.
Yeah, I didn't check the dashboard. Depending on how long you've been waiting for your cluster, like I said, it normally would take about 15 minutes to create a cluster of that size inside of from the demo, because it's 3 large nodes. And so if you've been waiting for longer than 15 minutes, then there may be service issue of some support. Yeah, I guess the last thing that I could just talk about to add some value is just regarding the canary object. And so basically, once you've got the cluster up, then what you'll do is you'll make a GitHub repo. You run the EKS enable repo flag. What this will do is it'll set up Flux for you, and it'll get all of the keys kind of plumbed together, and then you just put the key inside of the GitHub repo, and you're all set up. So this removes a lot of the ceremony that's necessary to bootstrap GitOps. If you're using the EKS UX, then you can just get Flux immediately. All you have to do is provide a repo and then configure the repo with the key, and everything else is pretty plug and play. And then after that, in order to install app mesh, right? So a Kubernetes cluster is great, and a Kubernetes cluster with bootstrap GitOps is even better. But once you have all of that set up, then you'll run the EKS enable profile flag or command. And if you enable profile app mesh, then what it'll do is it will bootstrap your Git repository with effectively a template of all of the resources that are necessary to run app mesh for your cluster. And it'll get an ingress set up and all of that so that you can actually start deploying services easily. And inside of that template, your repo will have a disabled namespace that contains a demo application. It's the pod info app. And so it'll expose the application to the internet, and it'll be configured to do progressive delivery. And the way that happens is done with a component that we have an open source project called Flagger. So if you go to Flagger app on the interwebs, then you can see this is actually where our demo is, or where our workshop is being hosted from, this domain. And Flagger is a project that will implement progressive delivery for you using a safely implemented Kubernetes controller, right? So from our previous talk, we were talking about the consistent storage. We were talking about controllers and reconciliation loops. And we were talking about how running them inside of the cluster, all of those 3 things together help you build very resilient systems that ensure that what you were describing is always kept in check. And that it happens in a reactive manner as well, so that it quickly converges. So you have systems that are very safe. You're not talking about like downtime of hours when you have like a network blip or something, right? Or potentially the danger of something never converging because an event was missed, right? And so because Kubernetes is a level triggered reconciling system, if you can build a progressive delivery operator around those concepts, then you end up with something that's much safer than like running a bash script inside of a Jenkins job, because it's just going to have a much higher failure rate in the long term. And Flagger is a very safe way to describe how these things should be done. And when I say describe how these things should be done, I literally mean that there is a canary resource. So if you haven't seen Flagger before, I get very excited about this technology. You do not have to use anything new except for the canary object. And so Flagger will decorate existing Kubernetes resources, such as a deployment, a horizontal pod autoscaler, and a service. And what you can see here is that you can use the canary object to describe how you would like analysis to be run when your deployment object changes. Right, so here what we see being described is that for every 10 seconds, and then where's the steps number? Sorry, I guess I might just be misreading it. But, and then the threshold's 5, step weight is 5, max weight is 50. Right, so this is a weight determined one. So for every 10 seconds, we want to start the steps at 5 and go to 50% of traffic being routed to our canary. So maybe just to explain that another way, in case it wasn't clear, what Flagger will do is it will use this description to, over a period of 100 seconds, so about 2 minutes, it's going to progress traffic from 5% to 50% to my canary deployment. So whenever I change something inside of my GitHub, inside of my Git repository about the deployment, then Kubernetes will go and make a new replica set. Flagger will see that. It'll start making a secondary version of the deployment, routing traffic to it, and then making sure that my policies are kept in check. And so there are other ones here, such as the load test policy. Such as a policy about my metrics, my Prometheus metrics for request duration and success rate, right? And so if any of these things fall out of whack, then the canary deployment will fail and everything will be yanked for us, just like a normal rolling update would have been yanked. But as opposed to a rolling update where you don't have very granular control, it's not about traffic shaping. A rolling update is about whether or not the compute and the liveness and readiness of that compute is healthy. But this is about the traffic, right? And so we're graduating from the deployment topology being our signal of failure or success to measuring the actual user traffic that's going to our service, right? And it's a very powerful construct. There's a couple of different strategies that you can employ, and some of them are discussed in the various topics that we have about canary releases. I really encourage you, if you're at that maturity level or just want to play in the lab with Flagger, you're going to need metrics retention. You're going to want to watch our material about zero downtime deployments as a prerequisite for this in order to be successful. But once you've got all of those things shipping and sailing on Kubernetes, you can go ahead and add a canary resource to your existing stuff. Use a declarative policy and get that additional safety. Start plugging in unit acceptance testing or load testing. You can do a database migration here if you want. You could add a manual deployment gate using a polling webhook. You could do all sorts of stuff. Would really love to see people getting creative with progressive delivery and GitOps on Kubernetes. So, yeah. Happy to answer questions regarding this, or if you're struggling with the workshop, would love to be a resource as well.
Cool. So with that, I will share our closing slide. Oops. Going to take over. That's okay.
Yeah, I cannot stop it, so.
Here we go. Present. So thanks everybody for joining us. As I mentioned, this is very much a practice run. So I think all in all, things went fairly smoothly for something that we already designed to be fairly laid back. So we really appreciate some of you joining us. Like I said, my email address is here. We also have gitops@weave.works. If there's any questions that you have after this, or you think, okay, well, I really want to get started with GitOps, but this is the type of information I'd like, just please let us know and we'll put it in together on the future shows that we'll be doing weekly, as well as potentially in the sort of formal GitOps Days event that we're planning for mid-May. So here's our Slack channel. If you have any other questions, if you haven't joined us before, if this is your first time joining us, welcome. We are Weave.works, and normally we do also a Weave user group every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. Stacey's here is our community manager who's put that together. And the best source of truth is our meetup page here, where we'll also be posting our future community specials around GitOps Days. So really appreciate your joining us. We'll be publicizing these a little bit more. This one was, like I said, pre-practice. We'll have a pre-practice and another pre-practice coming up. So if you'd like to join us for those, we'll have a variety of different things. Like I said, everything from free coding to longer talks with Stefan to other bits and pieces. So thanks for doing that. And yes, we're getting another confirmation with issues with EKS. So it appears that maybe that's just a challenge today. So thanks again, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks, Stacey. Thanks, Lee. And thanks to Daniel for the music.